Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want to tell you something that is very important to me, and I hope that it's important to you. And I'm actually pretty concerned because I want to tell you that you are in danger right now. You might not feel like you're in danger, and that's because the danger is invisible and the threat is real. This danger that you're in, this invisible threat, could cause you to end up in the hospital with physical problems or perhaps with mental health issues. This threat is real because it can negatively impact your relationships with your partner or spouse or kids, with your friends and family. Well, what is this invisible threat? Why are you in danger right now? Well, the threat is the prevailing and toxic hustle culture that we have in our society today. The toxic hustle culture is posing an invisible threat to you as a private school leader. And I'm very serious about this. You know, just in the past 2 weeks, through anything that I might have heard on the radio while driving to or from school, or perhaps in an Instagram post, perhaps with interviews on sports talk radio, there are 4 statements here, little phrases that I've written down that I've heard in just the past 2 weeks. Number 1, sleep is for the weak. I heard that recently. The grind never stops. Rise and grind. And you are what you do. And so these perhaps well-meaning motivational quotes about hard work and about hustling and about the grind and about, that commitment, I think that that's great. We all work hard. We all want to improve ourselves. We want to grow our schools. We want to do a great job with our responsibilities. But our prevailing and toxic hustle culture is a threat, and it's dangerous. I know what it did to me. I know what it does to my coaching clients. I would say that most of them, when I start working with them, are really not necessarily buying into the toxic hustle culture, but are definitely being impacted or even victims of it. And I know how hard it is to resist that hustle culture every single day. It's in our face every single day. It's perhaps the culture at our school. It's in Instagram. It's in all of these portrayals of people who are successful, and the only way that they got successful was through working crazy hours for a number of years and, not sleeping, and just all of these things, this entrepreneurial mindset. And there's nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur, but entrepreneurial mindset has been glorified to the point where this toxic hustle culture is a real problem in our society. And many, and I would say most private school leaders have either consciously or subconsciously adopted this, and it's dangerous and it's a threat. And we're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about the 4 things that will help you crush the hustle culture mentality on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast. Just quickly before we get into that, I'd love to give you a free gift just for listening to the podcast. And I've created a new resource called 7 Strategies to Effectively Deal with Difficult Teachers. And we all have difficult teachers at our school, and Sometimes it takes some courage and confidence to deal with them effectively, and sometimes we just feel like nothing works. Well, this can give you the strategies that you need and a step-by-step game plan to help you have that confidence and to meet with that teacher and to help hold them accountable to improve their performance and improve their attitude. And so you can grab this free guide at theprivateschoolleader.com/difficult. And I hope that it helps. That's the 7 strategies to effectively deal with difficult teachers. And you can get that for free at theprivateschoolleader.com/difficult, just as a thank you from me to you for listening to the podcast every week. And then I want to ask you a couple of questions. When you are at school, when you're in the midst of a long week at school, do you feel tired and discouraged and overwhelmed sometimes? Do you ever feel like the pace that you keep is not sustainable? Do you have the school invading your weeknights and your weekends? Do you feel like work-life balance is a myth? You just roll your eyes and kind of chuckle at that notion of having any kind of work-life balance? Well, if you answered yes to any of those questions, I want you to go over to theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive and just check it out. This is an online course that I've created. You've been listening to the podcast. You know what I teach. You know where I'm coming from. You know where I've been as far as the shape that I was in. And I want to take everything that I've learned about how to go from feeling all of those things to feeling joyful and happy and fulfilled and wanting to do this for a long time. And I can teach you how to do that in Thrive Academy. So check it out at theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive. All right. So we're talking about the hustle culture today and how to crush that toxic hustle culture and not let it destroy you. I want to talk for a minute about the toxic aspects of hustle culture. And so the first one is the glorification of busyness, glorification of being busy. Busy, busy, busy. Someone asks you, how's it going? How you're not going to say, oh, you know what? It's great. I got to the gym today. Was in the yard last night, just kind of chilling in the hammock. You're not going to say that, even if it is true. Oh, so busy. Oh man, so busy, so busy. And I said before, it's because it's everywhere. We're inundated with these images, Instagram, social media. The way that you become successful. Being busy is often equated with being successful. And that just leads to a toxic cycle of overcommitting yourself, trying to outwork every problem, and then being stressed out. And, there's nothing wrong with hard work. Private school leaders, you work really, really hard. I know that. But this glorification of being busy, it neglects the importance of resting and recovering. And that's so vital for your long-term health and for being productive and for having any kind of energy, anything left at the end of the day for yourself and for your loved ones. And so the first toxic aspect of hustle culture is that it glorifies being busy. And then the second one is that it equates rest with laziness. So objectively, that rest is good for you. We all want to get a little more sleep. We all want to take a little better care of ourselves. But I think that the hustle culture mentality in our society has attached shame to rest. That resting means you're lazy. If you're not grinding, then you're lazy. And someone else is getting ahead. Someone else is, it's just, I've told this story before. I'll tell it quickly again. I think it was a couple summers ago that I was given a gift, I think for Father's Day, of a hammock for my backyard. And I didn't notice it before, but turns out I've got 2 trees that are perfect distance apart for a hammock. And so loved it, that summer. Tried to be out there, read a book or do something just a few times here and there when the weather was beautiful and just had a few minutes. I didn't mention that to anybody at school. I didn't mention that to my boss. I didn't mention that to my coworkers that, yeah, I was in the hammock. It was so great. You know why? Because they probably would have been like, oh, must be nice. Must be nice to have all that free time to blah, blah. I was working, da, 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 da. I kept that to myself because there's shame attached to rest. Rest is laziness. I'm not telling people about my hammock. Well, that's a problem because we need rest to be our best selves. And if the hustle culture is equating rest with laziness, it's a huge problem. Another problem with the hustle culture is the burnout and mental health issues that are the end result. If hustle culture glorifies constant work and being productive and work all the time, and that can lead to burnout. Burnout is defined as the end result of high stress, usually caused by work. It's the end stage of all of that stress. And this pressure to always be on and continuously productive, it just becomes overwhelming, and it's not good for our well-being. And then another outcome of the hustle culture is just neglecting our personal lives. This emphasis on work and being busy all the time, outworking any problem, not getting, sleep is laziness. It comes at a price, and that price is our personal life and our relationships and hobbies. And I can hear what you're saying. You're like, hobbies? I don't have times for hobbies. Self-care. I don't have time for self-care. Well, that's the problem. I've said it before, private school leaders are sacrificing their identity on the altar of their school. Is your identity the school? It didn't used to be that way. There's a thing that I do in Thrive Academy that's called an identity chart. And your name is in the middle, and there's all these lines coming out from it, and you're putting, wife, mother, sister, painter, baker, runner, rock climber, churchgoer, all of these different things that make you who you are. Well, in office hours for Thrive Academy a couple weeks ago, I had a private school leader, a woman that was kind of distraught because she had worked on it for like an hour, and all she could come up with was mom, wife, and leader. And she worked on it, again a week later, and we had a conversation, and she was able to come up with a lot of other things. And then we started working on, trying to have some of those things happen intentionally from time to time. Take some of your identity back, your humanity. If your identity is the school, that's a problem. We neglect our personal lives when we buy into the toxic hustle culture. It just leads to a complete lack of balance, and then it strains our relationships, and it diminishes our quality of life. Two more things about hustle culture. Hustle culture causes unrealistic expectations. It promotes the idea that success is solely a result of relentless hard work. And it ignores other factors like privilege, opportunity, systemic issues. And so that's a whole nother conversation there is that, not everyone is at the same starting line. Not everyone starts at the same starting line. That's just a fact. And then this leads to unrealistic expectations that either you put on yourself, or that your board chair or that your head of school might put on you. And then it leads to a sense of failure because you can never meet those high standards. And so think about how ridiculous that is. You're working your butt off, but because of the hustle culture, you still feel like a failure because you're not meeting those high standards. And it's because they're completely unreasonable. Finally, the last part here about the hustle culture, and I mentioned it before, is just that your identity becomes the school. And, if you're were a person who liked to bake or play pickleball or garden or golf or paint or make jewelry or fill in the blank, I I wonder where did it go and why. And you're like, well, I'm really busy. I know. But we have to be intentional about this, because having your identity be the school is a recipe for you not doing this for very long. Or if you continue to lead your school and your identity is the school, you're setting yourself up for resentment, for physical problems, for mental problems. Your body was not meant to take this pace, this lack of rest. And these problems, your body is eventually going to pull the emergency brake. And that could be with tremendous back pain. It could be with breaking out in hives. It could be with severe burnout. It could be with migraines. It could be with vertigo. It could be with fill in the blank. Your body is going to pull the emergency brake. You don't have to have it. It could be you that pulls the emergency brake. It doesn't have to be that your body starts to shut down. There's too high of a price. And I want to talk to you about some specific things that you can do. There's an episode that I did. I'll link it in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 96. Episode 48 is called "You Can Overcome the Hustle Culture If You Stop Doing These 6 Things." You could give that another listen. But I want to talk just for the last few minutes about this book written by Arianna Huffington, and it's called Thrive, the Third Metric to Redefining Success and Creating a Life of Well-Being, Wisdom, and Wonder. And that's a mouthful. But I want to just pull a couple of points from this book. And one of my favorite quotes from Arianna Huffington in this book, she says, quote, "Don't buy society's definition of success because it's not working for anyone." Okay, society's definition of success. And so in her book, what she does is she challenges this pursuit of success and she pushes for a more holistic approach. And so we're going to take a quick look at her thinking on how to overcome that hustle culture. And so she talks about this thing in her book, Thrive, called the third metric. And Huffington says that traditionally success has been measured by 2 metrics, money and power. But she wants to add a third metric to that. And her third metric has to do with redefining success, but the third metric consists of 4 pillars, and that's number 1, well-being, number 2, wisdom, number 3, wonder, and number 4, giving. And so it's just this idea, this holistic idea of that there's another pillar, there's another way, another metric to measure success, because if you have all the money and all the power, but you don't have well-being, that doesn't sound very successful to me. Certainly not sustainable. So let's take a quick look at these 4 pillars according to Arianna Huffington in her book Thrive, and then we'll specifically apply them to you as a private school leader. All right. So point number 1 is well-being. So first of all is your physical and mental health. The author emphasizes the importance of prioritizing health, and that if you don't have your health, success is meaningless. I want you to think about that for a minute. What's your definition of success? What's your definition of a successful school? Is it a certain number in enrollment? Is it test scores? Is it have something to do with the budget? What is it? Well, we can have it both ways. We can be successful and still take care of ourselves. We just have to do it the right way. And so success is meaningless if we don't have our health. Another point under well-being from Huffington is sleep. She talks a lot about sleep in this book. And we know how important sleep is, and we also have good intentions when it comes to sleep. She advocates for, and I've advocated for this too, is that we got to change we're not going to be able to change society's attitude towards sleep, but I want you to take a step back and just recognize what the toxic hustle culture in our society, how it views sleep. Sleep is laziness. Why aren't you grinding? Why aren't you getting up at 4 a.m. and grinding for 2 hours before you go to work? This is not going to work. It's not going to work long term. It's not. Our bodies were not designed for this. And then the third point under well-being, according to Huffington and Strive, is stress reduction. So whatever works for you, if you're a person of faith and it's prayer and reading the Bible, or your the religious texts in your religion, meditation, mindfulness. I've mentioned on this podcast before that mindfulness has been a game changer for me, as far as some box breathing and some, just a couple of mindfulness practices when you're feeling really stressed. And it can definitely reduce your stress. Just even things like drinking water first thing in the morning when you wake up, because that's when you're the most dehydrated. Moving your body a little bit. But even if it's just the breathing and the pausing and the naming of the reason that you're feeling stressed, sometimes that can reduce the fight or flight response in your body by naming it. What am I stressed out about right now? So just stress reduction practices that, and I'll link, I did an episode on how to feel less stressed at school. And I can link that in the show notes as well. All right. The second pillar, according to Arianna Huffington in her book Thrive, is wisdom. So we got number one, well-being. Number two is wisdom. So what she's saying there is that, we need to grow intellectually. Are you a lifelong learner? I think you are if you're listening to this podcast, because you're trying to grow yourself as a private school leader. But we need to stay intellectually curious, because there were many, many years where that was a part of who we were. And I think sometimes being busy crowds that out. And just that continuous learning, reading, listening to podcasts, being curious, that's super important for us to grow in our wisdom to combat that hustle culture. And then the second point under wisdom is reflection. This was something that I probably did not do in my career until about 4 or 5 years ago. And our school hired a new head of lower school to replace someone that had retired. And she has really helped me to improve my reflective practice, to start thinking back on things, taking time to reflect, because, as private school leaders, we're always about, okay, what's next, and just moving on. Whether it's just, some of you might like to journal, some of you just, it's a matter of just pausing and thinking about it, reflecting on things. I think that reflection leads to a gratitude practice. I've talked about that before on the podcast, about how important that is and how supported that is by research, that gratitude practice can change your life. And so reflection. And then the third point under wisdom is decision making. And so, decision fatigue is a real thing. We make so many decisions in a day, and we want to make good decisions and decisions that have wisdom instead of impulsivity. And then we regret them afterwards. And isn't that something that is a challenge for all of us as school leaders, is not making impulsive decisions, but taking that moment. Wisdom is knowledge applied to various different unique situations. And for us to just be able to pause, use wisdom, be thoughtful, think it through, and then make that decision instead of boom, 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 decision. And sometimes we have to, but I think that we need to apply wisdom and pump the brakes a little bit when it comes to the pace at which we make those decisions. Okay, we're talking about the third metric, which is overall well-being, that success is defined mostly by most people as money and power. But in her book Thrive, Arianna Huffington is putting out there that there's a third metric, and that's the holistic well-being. And we've talked about 2 pillars so far. Number 1, well-being. Number 2, wisdom. Number 3, wonder. Wonder. Okay, so what does she mean by this? Well, it's just curiosity and awe. Cultivating a sense of wonder about the world leads to greater creativity and joy. And I'll be honest, this wasn't something that I used to do, and I've done it more often. I want to say it was about 3 years ago. I was on a year-end field trip with the 6th graders, and we go to this outdoor education environmental kind of camp. It's a 3-day trip. And I remember towards dinner time, we were a little early at the cafeteria at the dining hall, and I was just kind of like laying there on the grass under a tree. And I just noticed that tree for the first time. And I just laid there for like 15 minutes looking at that tree. The sun's coming through, the wind's, the leaves are blowing a little bit in the wind. And I know that might sound a little bit kumbaya to some people listening to this podcast, but I'm telling you, if we can slow down enough to appreciate what's around us, it's going to change us. And the pace that we keep often does never allow for that. So we have to be intentional about it. So to just have some wonder, some curiosity, some awe, a sense of awe when it comes to the things around us, especially these amazing kids that we get to work with. And, nature, spending time in nature. Maybe you're not a big outdoors person. Here's the thing. A lot of people that I coach, they are big outdoors people, but they never go on hikes. They never go on walks because they're too busy. That has to change, and it can change. And so if you like to be outside, then we need to find more ways and times for you to be outside. It's very restorative. There's a lot of research to support that, and I'm not just talking about the sunshine. I'm talking about being in nature. And then gratitude, and I mentioned gratitude practice. I'll link that episode. I feel strongly about it. I've mentioned before here on the podcast that I start every Monday morning on my drive to work with a gratitude practice, and I'm telling you, it can change your day. It can change your life to be intentionally grateful and to have a gratitude practice, because it just shifts that focus from lack to abundance and just causes a more positive outlook on your life. And so gratitude. And then that brings us to the 4th point under her 4 pillars. And we're talking about Thrive by Arianna Huffington and her take on how to overcome the hustle culture. And number 4 is giving. So with giving, she points out 3 things. One is generosity. And so when we give of ourselves, that helps us to thrive in life. And it contributes to our personal happiness and our sense of connection to people. And it turns our focus outward when we're giving. I think that as private school leaders, we give a lot because our cause is just and our calling is clear. As we work at our schools, as we lead as servant leaders in these schools and help shape the lives of these kids and take good care of these teachers and parents. But anytime that we can give generously, whether it's a contribution or giving of our time, it can bring us great joy. Something that's brought me joy now for almost 10 years is that I have a daughter in Indonesia that's Compassion International is what I was looking for. Compassion International child. Started supporting her when she was, I think, 7 years old, and now she's 16. And that's brought a lot of joy to our family, helping take care of Abby and her family in Indonesia. Another point under giving is community involvement, and also leading with empathy and compassion. And I think that most private school leaders are high in empathy and compassion, or we probably wouldn't have gotten into this role. But the whole idea here, though, is just in summary, is to give helps us to turn the focus from what we do to outward, perhaps those less fortunate than us. And that brings us joy, but it also brings us personal happiness and a sense of connection to other people. So what are the big takeaways from today's episode? I started out talking about how the hustle culture is so toxic, how it's an invisible threat to school leaders, and that we really need to take this seriously and not just adopt either consciously or subconsciously the lie that is the toxic hustle culture. And I laid that out for you, and then I talked about Thrive by Arianna Huffington and how typically success is measured by money and power, but she has proposed a third metric, which includes well-being, wisdom, and wonder with the addition of giving of ourselves. And so what's your call to action for this episode? Well, I'd like for you to take 15 minutes this week to think about one or two ways that you currently do buy in to the hustle culture. So stop and think, what's a way that I do buy in to this hustle culture mentality? And then take one strategy from this episode and add it to the way that you engage with your work. And I know I don't want to make it so that it sounds like it's so easy. It's very, very difficult to change our patterns of thinking, but this pattern of thinking is very destructive and is going to take you places that you don't want to go. So think about how you're engaging with hustle culture and then apply one strategy from this episode. And just to wrap it up, I want to remind you again about the new resource that I've created just to say thanks for listening to the podcast. It's called 7 Strategies to Effectively Deal with Difficult Teachers. And you can get that over at theprivateschoolleader.com/difficult. And then one last reminder about Thrive Academy, this online digital course that I've created that will take you through from getting clear about your compelling why and making sure that you aren't sacrificing your identity on the altar of your school, and take you through best practice for school leaders with productivity and time management, and then into work-life blend with boundaries, vitalizing your relationships, increasing your energy level, leading effectively. It's all there for you. Check it out at Thrive Academy. Check out Thrive Academy at theprivateschoolleader.com/thrive. And I'd love to hear from you. My email address is mark.o.minkus@gmail.com. The show notes are at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 96. And if you could write a review and rate the podcast wherever you listen to it, it helps the algorithm push this out as suggested content to private school leaders all over the world. And I'm on Instagram at the Private School Leader and Twitter at the PS Leader. And I'd like to ask for a favor. If you get value from this podcast, please take the link and text it or email it to another school leader in your life. And think about an aspiring leader at your school and text them the link to the podcast. We want to get this word out and share these resources and these strategies with as many leaders and aspiring leaders as possible. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I just want to say how much I appreciate you and all the amazing work you're doing at your school. And thank you so much for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.